Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled CBP 416, What Every Architect and Designer Should Know About Tile Installations. I'm Jim Olson with the National Tile Contractors Association. I want to welcome you and thank you for taking time out of your busy day and schedule to attend today's webinar sponsored by Custom Building Products. Before I introduce today's speaker, I do have some business to run through. I want to remind you that during this webinar, you will be muted. Please use the questions area on your computer to type in your questions, and we will answer your questions at the end of this presentation. If the audio on your computer is poor, please call the number on the invite to this webinar and listen on your phone. All NTCA webinars are available to watch at any time on the NTCA YouTube channel shortly after the webinars are presented. This will give you easy access to watch and or share all current and past programs at your convenience. All right, I'm very happy to introduce our speaker today. Dale Roberts is the Commercial Architect Services Representative for Custom Building Products. Dale has been in the business for 30 years, including 16 as a tile contractor. Dale has earned his CSI, CDT, CCPR, CTC, and LEED Green Associate accreditations. I want to welcome you, Dale. Please, everybody, just pay attention. Dale's got a good program here, and thank you, Dale. We'll talk at the end.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. Yep. Well, welcome, everybody. Welcome. This is probably my worst nightmare, talking to an empty room for an hour, so welcome along. Hopefully you guys will learn something as you go through here. So as Jim mentioned, I started out in the tile industry as a tile finisher in the local tile union, became a licensed tile contractor for 16 years. After a few bumps in the road, ups and downs being a tile contractor, I went to work for one of my friends in the retail section, selling natural stones and slates. Probably the worst 2 years of my life, really. I just do not work well with the retail clients. I'd had people coming in and ask me for warm colors and cool colors, and I'd touch the slate and go, well, it's kind of cool. I'm not the color guy, so I let the wife choose all the colors. But I've been working for Custom Building Products now for over 20 years as their commercial architectural rep. Help you guys with details, specifications, questions on tile and stone. I love tile and stone, especially the installations, the beauty of it, the longevity. So we'll get going with this presentation here. This is an AIE registered program. If you need accreditation, you need certificates, you can email me. Jim's going to throw it up there in the chat also. And at the end, I'll have my email registration there for you. So what I'm really trying to help you prevent, and for what you to learn during this next hour on tile and stone, is to prevent problems with tile and stone installations. Every time we have a tile failure in the industry, it really detracts on everybody. Your owners, your clients don't want to use tile again. Well, I had a failure last time. So I'm here to help you guys kind of prevent those, what to look for in these installations, especially through better details, specifications, knowing what to look for if you do a job walk, and kind of the industry standards we're going to be going through quite a bit as we look at these. In the tile industry, we have some excellent industry guidelines. The TCNA handbooks, our ANSI standards. NTCA also has some great information on their website also, along with these webinars. So I also recommend you check that out. Probably most important is the 2023 TCNA handbook. These have details. This has grown quite a bit. A lot of information is packed into this handbook. And if you put these references into your specifications, you should know what you're specifying. As I walk through here, we'll talk about how a few people got in trouble because they really didn't know what they were specifying. And it came back to bite them because they just said, well, let's just reference the whole standards, the whole book, and then the tile guys will follow that and we'll have a great installation. So this is a mixed use structure down in San Diego. And kind of just a quick note, millions of square feet of tile are installed perfectly every time. Beautiful installations, long lasting. I'm going to be showing you some job failures just because it's easier to walk you back from those failures and explain how it happened, how to prevent it, and how to protect yourselves through proper specifications and details. So don't get too worried about some of these failures. Mixed use building, the few tiles started falling off on the sidewalk. The owners, of course, got nervous. They didn't want anything falling off and hitting the clients walking below on the sidewalk. So they came back and started, we went down, did a quick inspection, said, look, this was installed improperly. You need to strip this off the building and reinstall. So if you see your contractor using a thin set mortar, cementitious adhesive like this, and they're doing what we call the spot bonding method, you need to shut this down right away. They're not getting enough coverage on this installation, and this can cause problems later on in the project's life as tile will start to debond and fall off. So this is just not a good thing. We've got to definitely be aware of this. Now this is a Southern California apartment. Worked very closely with the architectural firm. We had some very tight specifications. We had a very tight mock-up. They were very concerned about this. They had stucco, they had metal on the exterior, and they had some tile. So we walked through some very carefully tile specifications. We had, get this video going here. We had very tight specifications. We had a mock-up going. And so here you can see the tile on the exterior. The owners called and said they had some tile tenting there. You can kind of see in that middle of that column, it'll pop up here. There it is, tile tenting or shearing. And one of the things we had specified was the movement joints in the soft joints for the tile and stone. Also, that drip edge was supposed to be hanging over the edge. There was supposed to be a caulking there. You can hear them sounding the tile. This is to make sure there's no hollow tile. So there's a balcony right below this issue. So they had to strip this tile off. When we went out, we had found that the contractor had subbed out the exterior tile installation. They didn't follow the guidelines. They didn't follow the specifications. So I, along with the architectural firm, the principal, went out and we walked them line through line. They were blaming the liquid applied waterproofing membrane that was there, that the mortar didn't stick to it, that the tile didn't stick to it. But unfortunately, we can't always know what our competitors are using for adhesives. A lot of times, sometimes the chemicals aren't compatible, they're not using the right mortar. So generally, we recommend using a single source for all your tile and stone installation products. We know our products work with ours. I know our competitors' products work with theirs. And that's always kind of the best route to go. That way there's no finger pointing at the back end. And they also weren't getting excellent coverage. They used a too small of a notch trowel. They didn't do any back buttering or what we call flat troweling on this installation. And they also didn't use proper movement joints. At the end of the slides show today, we'll be talking some about the movement joints as we go on and give you a little bit more details about that. So just about everything on the specifications, the details were just completely missed on this project. So it went back, the installers had to go back in and reinstall. We kept the architectural firm out of trouble because they had done everything properly. So basically that's kind of what we're going to be walking through today, is how to make sure we get these specified properly, detailed properly. So these are kind of just some guidelines: surface prep, installation, grouting, the products that go along with them. And as you've probably noticed, tile is getting much larger these days. When I was installing tile, 12 by 12 was good size tile. You got some big size tile, some really large stuff. We were going 16 by 16. I may have even done an 18 by 18. And today they have these 5-foot by 10-foot panels. It's just crazy. Most everything these days seems to be 12 by 24s or 24 by 48, some style like that, size like that. So size is getting much larger these days. I think they say like 75, 80% of all tile is a large format tile, which is any tile with one side greater than 15 inches. So why does that matter to you? Because of the flatness. And there are ANSI standards. In the old days, 1/4 inch and 10 feet was flat enough for most of your smaller format tiles. As we got into these larger format tiles, we're looking at an 1/8 inch and 10 feet now. And even for the porcelain panel tile slash slabs, the GPTPs, 1/8 inch and 10 feet. Now the issue really comes up because we have a gap between Division 3, the concrete division in the specifications, and Division 9. Division 3 is using the FL numbers, floor flatness and floor level numbers. These numbers are measured within 72 hours of concrete placement. They don't go over any of the penetrations in the slab, the columns, lockouts, or they don't go to the edges of the slabs. They don't go across any movement joints. But of course, when we're doing flooring, we have to go over those. Also, the flooring could be done anywhere from 6 to 12 months after placement. You may get some warping, curling in that slab. So we have to kind of marry these two and make sure that we get a nice flat floor. So you have to kind of think about that as you're doing your specifications. Are you putting an allowance in the flooring specifications, your 9300 for the tile, to flatten those floors, to grind, to patch, to self-level? So how do we attain this flatness? Most of the times these days, we're doing some type of self-leveler on these larger projects. We could also do some patching, single pour, or even on the right there, a traditional mortar bed. Now, mortar bed is sand and cement mixed on site. This is probably going to double the time of the installation, double the cost, but it is an excellent traditional method to use. So when we're talking about self-leveling, proper preparation is the key. Some self-levelers will require shot blasting. A lot of ours these days are clean, prime, and pour. You can make a job installation much quicker that way, as long as the concrete is accepting the water test. You drop a little bit of water on it, make sure it absorbs in there, make sure you don't have any curing compounds, contaminants on that slab, and you can just do a clean, prime, and pour on that installation. Primer is the key on these installations. You want to make sure and get that primer in. And I have to admit, when I was a tile contractor and the self-leveling products just came out, I did not use the primers. It was expensive. And I did have a few failures in that installation because I was trying to be too cheap. And a lot of the contractors do that these days. So it's just something to make sure that you have in your specifications, if you're putting the self-levelings in there, that they make sure and use the primer in those applications. And also, are they trying to achieve a level floor, or are they trying to achieve a flat floor? We had one instance where the slab was out of level. The tile contractor was using a large format tile, and he was just going to flatten the floor. But in his documents, he said that he was going to level the floor. But what we really meant was he was going to fill some of the low spots and grind a few of the high spots. He wasn't going to completely fix that floor. And so they accepted it. And when it came back, it's the architect went out, put a level on the floor and said, "Hey, this floor is not level." He said, "Well, I wasn't meaning to level it. I was just going to flatten that floor." So terminology, very important. It could get you in a lot of trouble. So Sometimes the tile terminology is a little bit different than the architectural terminology. So something just to be aware of. In the TCNA handbook, we have optional membranes. These optional membranes are just about in every detail. As you go through, there's actually typically a list of what optional membranes you can use. We have moisture vapor control to prevent that moisture coming up through the slab. Sound attenuation membranes to reduce that impact sound for multifamily projects. Uncoupling membranes, crack isolation membranes, waterproofing membranes. We'll touch a little bit on these as we go along here. Got a trick question for you though. According to TCNA, is a commercial bathroom a wet area or a dry area? I always ask this when I do presentations in person. It's always a very fun question, gets a lot of comments. According to TCNA, TCNA actually has an environmental exposure classification. They, of course, go through residential and commercial, COM 1 through COM 6. So according to TCNA, all these bathrooms are limited water exposure. If waterproofing is desired, it must be clearly specified. Floors and walls in bathroom, water exposure is limited. They consider wet areas soaked, saturated, or regularly and frequently subject to moisture liquids. Basically your tub walls and shower walls and that. And they also, as you get down in there, they have exterior installations also. So imagine you're the specifier. You specify in any wet area where they're installing tile, they must use a cement backer board, waterproofing membrane, and a cement mortar adhesive for this installation. Low bidder wins the project. He comes out, he sees these bathrooms, and he read the TCNA handbook very through. He knows that this bathroom is a COM 2. They're not specifying, they're not doing the showers, they're just doing the bathroom walls and floors. So he installs the tile right over the gyp board with a mastic. This mastic was a water soluble mastic. What he didn't know was that the maintenance facilities or the janitors were coming in weekly and steam cleaning these bathrooms. They actually put so much water that they were blowing the tile off the wall. Well, the architect at the meeting that we went to thought they had the contractor right here, because he said, look, I put in any wet areas, you should be using waterproof membrane, cement adhesive, cement backer board. He said, bathroom's not a wet area. You didn't tell me they were steam cleaning these. If they did, I would advise you to use those things. He went right to the TCNA and said, you said follow the TCNA guidelines, correct? He said, yes, they did. He pulled out the book, showed him that. And it's like, oops. He had to pay for those reinstall. So just something to be aware of. Again, there's a lot of information in these handbooks, so good for you to know. 11810 are waterproofing membranes, and just because you apply a waterproofing membrane over backer board doesn't mean these installations are going to be waterproof. A lot of times we see holes and gaps and just bad seaming, bad installation, and they said, well, I put the waterproofing membrane in. Yeah, but that's not a waterproof installation. The big question always comes back up, who's taping, who's seaming these things? Generally, that's going to be your backer board installers. And with the tile installation, they should be using a fiberglass mesh tape and cement adhesive. Don't let them use the paper tape and their gypsum adhesive. These are not meant for wet areas. And water moisture does get behind these, even if it is a porcelain tile. So be very aware of that. Also, with these tub enclosures, whether it be a bathtub or just the shower pan like this, fiberglass, we've been seeing a lot of these in multifamilies these days. Make sure that the backer board is going over those lips. The TCNA does require that they shim the backer board and shim it out over the shower pan lips or the tub surround lips. You can see here they actually shimmed it out already, but they shimmed it out before they put the pan in. And a lot of times we see the board set on top of the pan or even a gap in there, and that's going to be an issue and a problem for leaking. And it's always best to get the full sheet down there. You don't want to try to patch in little. I mean, if you have to, there are some ways we can do that, but it's best to get the backer board over the top of those flanges. Also in traditional showers, on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that cement mortar bed and then the thin set, and the red waterproofing is underneath. This is what we call a traditional shower pan. A lot of times you'll have the weep holes down here, and this is the way I started installing showers. It was a moisture in, moisture out. As we started doing a lot of tear outs, we found that a lot of moisture was being held in these mortar beds. Sometimes they're too tightly compacted. Sometimes the weep holes are blocked. The tiles, and especially natural stone, sometimes looks very dirty. We've actually gone back and cleaned some and asked them not to use the shower for a while, and it'll dry out and clean up. And then as they start to use the shower again, moisture will accumulate underneath there. There are a lot of details now where we can put the waterproofing directly on top of that mortar bed installation, directly underneath the tile, as you see on the right there. And that way it evaporates much quicker. You don't get the water being held in the mortar bed as with the traditional ones. So my recommendation is use the waterproofing on top of the mortar bed installations. Also, we've seen in a lot of multifamily homes, the showers, senior living facilities, improper substrates. We see the gypsum board just run into the shower, and they say, well, you're going to waterproof it anyways. What's it matter what board? TCNA has some very direct requirements on what's supposed to be used along with the building codes. And these are your proper substrates for showers, and the details that go along with them are in TCNA, but just make sure that the shower has a different backer board than what's on the rooms outside the shower itself. It should be a different backer board. A lot of times there's confusion because the backer board names are very similar, except or maybe they'll have the tile backer in there. But whether it's a dent shield or a gold bond, they'll be using the gold bond throughout the house, and all of a sudden they're using gold. But well, it's a gold bond, yeah, but gold bond what? Or a dent shield what? So it makes a lot of difference. You just want to make sure that they're using the proper backer boards in those shower applications. Move along to another one of the membranes, crack isolation membranes. These are insurance policies. Yes, it is going to increase the cost of that installation, but are your owners going to be happy if that floor has a crack through it? Now, if it's a very common tile that they've stocked for years, you can always replace these, repair them, fix it. But if this is a specialty tile that's coming in, then I'd highly recommend anti-fracture membrane underneath that tile assembly. And a lot of times when we're talking to the contractors, the general contractors, the architects, they'll say, well, it looks like they rolled something heavy across there and broke it. It's like, no, I can tell that this is a movement. Concrete is always shrinking, moving a little bit, and that's why we have those anti-fracture membranes underneath those to absorb a little bit of that energy. So if it was just one tile and it cracked in the corner, that would tell me, yes, something heavy walked across that, rolled across that, and maybe that one tile didn't have enough adhesive mortar underneath that corner. But as it starts to run through all of these, then that tells me that there's movement in that concrete slab. And they say, well, how do you know? And it's like, well, we've seen this quite often. So let's open up a tile, and I can show you that right where this crack is, there will be a crack in that concrete floor. So of course we do. We open it up, show them, and there's that crack. So again, you can put down liquid applied membranes, sheet membranes to absorb that movement. Any above grade installations in TCNA do recommend a anti-fracture membrane underneath that tile or stone. So again, here it is. We can install directly to it. Now, a lot of times the general contractors don't believe that, hey, how does a cement adhesive bond to what looks to them like a plastic sheet? And we tell them there's ANSI standards that we have to do, that it meets, that, we have no problem doing this. And they say, well, I really don't believe you. So sometimes we have to do an on-site test. So as you can see, when we have the proper adhesives and the proper waterproofing membranes, we get a very strong bond with that. So we're talking about installation methods. That has a lot to do with the bond strength and also the adhesives themselves that we use for these installations. When we're talking about the adhesives for tile and stone, generally we're talking about thin set installations. The mortar beds is more of a traditional method. We sometimes call it thick set, floating, mortar installation, thick bed, mortar bed. So thin set installation is bonded directly to the substrate. So if your floor is uneven, the tile is going to be uneven. That's why generally we have to come in and grind or self-level those floors, because concrete's never truly flat. It gets expensive to really place it flat, and as it starts to go through its life cycle, sometimes you'll see it curl, warp, and that's why this is probably used most about 80% of the time. If they're using a mortar bed installation, this is a traditional method, cement and sand mixed on site. This is out at the Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Double the cost of the installation over thin set, and probably going to double the time. This is going to give you a very flat level floor. You can generally use very tight joints for these natural stones or tiles. And these are the type of installations where you can slide the quarters across, because they're going to tap that tile or stone into the wet mortar bed. With the mortar bed installation, you can also slope to a drain. You can slope away from the building to move the water away from the building. You can do some ramping with this. So there's some advantage to doing a mortar bed installation, but again, you have to make sure that your owner is willing to go with that cost and differential between the thin set installation and your mortar bed installation. So for the adhesives, we have a lot of different ANSI options these days. We have an unmodified cement mortar. This is pretty much what I cut my teeth on. We have epoxy bonding mortars, 118.3. These are going to give you your highest shear bond strengths. These are going to be used if your tile or stone has some type of fiberglass backing, some type of coating on there. Generally, we can also use our modified cement mortars or improved modified, but we'll want to test those. So anytime it has a fiberglass coating on the back of that, epoxy bonding mortar. Most bonding mortars are at least a 118.4 today, a modified cement mortar. And generally, if you're using heavy duty use, exterior installations, veneer installations, I'd recommend a 118.15, an improved modified cement mortar. You get greater adhesive strengths. And then of course we have our mastics, generally light duty installations, walls only. There are a lot of different mortars, thin sets to choose from. It's always best to talk with your local rep, make sure you're getting the right product for that right installation. So when I talk about ANSI shear bond strengths, this is the way we test our adhesives, the thin sets, the mortars. We're gluing porcelain tile to porcelain tile, quarry tile to wood. We're letting them cure. They're offset just a little bit. And this is done by our chemist interns. They spend their whole day doing the shear bond test and calculations and coming up with our shear bond strengths. Now here's the chart for just kind of give you a rough idea of the adhesive strength. So with the 118.1, we were going from about 50 to roughly 200 PSI, the red spot. When we hit our 118.4, we're going anywhere from about 200 to 400 PSI. And as we get into our 118.15s, we're going up over 400 PSI. Now, of course, the cost is going to go up as you go along this and get greater adhesive strengths. There are more polymers in it, better quality cements, more chemistry, but it gives you more confidence in that mortar that it's going to adhere to that tile or stone. When we're talking porcelain tiles, we're almost talking glass, very similar to glass. So very difficult to bond to. So you want to make sure you're using the right mortar. Also very important, make sure in your specifications you have the right mortar, the right ANSI standards, and sometimes the ANSI standards won't be enough. You'll have to call out a specific product and use that as the basis of your design. But also mortar coverage. We're looking at 80% coverage in dry areas and 95% coverage in wet areas. We used to say 100% in wet areas, but it got thrown out. Judges would say that it's impossible to get 100% when you're doing construction. So we backed that off to about 95%. Also important as we're doing some challenging installations, flat troweling or back buttering, we do recommend that. They are not required. Again, it's going to increase the cost of that installation some to do flat troweling, but this gives it increased bond strength. So you're not just putting a dry tile into that wet thin set. And when we're talking coverage, we're talking the transfer of mortar from the substrate to the tile itself, and that you're getting that. And what we're trying to see here in the 4x4, 8x8, 12x12, all done with a 3/8 inch notch trowel, is the different coverage you get and the different types of tile. A lot of times I'm asked what notch trowel to use, and that's going to be different for each project. I can't say, but I can tell you that you need to put this in your specifications and not worry about what notch trowel they're using, as long as you're getting that 80%, 95% coverage. As you can see in the 18x18, a lot of voids. You're not getting 85% coverage. This reduces the shear strength in these tiles itself. You're not getting great coverage. What we're trying to get is those ridges to collapse and fill the valleys and kind of get that spider webbing that you're seeing below the tiles themselves. That's where you're getting the good coverage. Move on from our mortars to our grouts. And the grouts are there to fill the voids in the tile or stone. Generally, one of the first questions I get is whether you use an unsanded or sanded. A lot of the products these days can be used in both, but generally we're looking at 1/8 inch or less for an unsanded grout. Basically, these are going to be pretty close to pure cement. They're not completely 100% pure cement. And if you use it in too wide of a grout joint, it will crack or check. So we start adding aggregate, and so anything 1/8 inch or greater, we're generally looking for a sanded grout. Now there are, again, some grouts these days that can go smaller than 1/8 of an inch and up to 1/2 an inch. So it's just check with your favorite manufacturer on those installations. I know you guys spend a lot of time looking at color. Trust me, I understand that. My wife loves color, and so I let her choose the color all the time. But you not only need to choose the color, but you need to choose what type of grout. Now, again, you kind of have to look at what your clients want. Do they want the most expensive, best grout out there? Do they want the least? Is this really a budget conscious owner and he's looking for the cheapest thing out there? Generally, I try to push those at least to a 118.7, the high performance cement based grout. These are generally going to only run you about a nickel a square foot more for a standard grout joint. Single component grouts are going to be your best stain resistant grout, and then your epoxies are going to be the best chemical resistant grout. As you get over to the 118.3s, the epoxy grouts and the single component grouts, they're going to be harder to clean, harder to install, but give you better stain resistant and chemical resistance. Generally, we ask you to do a small test on the tile. If you do see some staining or the grout sticking, there are grout releases. You could pre-seal the tile, pre-seal the tile also to prevent that staining, but it is best to do a quick mock-up on those. And again, I know grout color is important. When we're mixing these grouts, you wouldn't believe the difference in the sand, just the coloration of the sand, the different colors in the cement. These are manufactured across the United States. Sand, cement varies, so they have to do small cookies, check the color before it's bagged. This is a quality control done. And so generally we're going to hit the right grout color across the United States before these are ever bagged. What changes on site is the type of material that's used, the temperature, and how much water is mixed in the grout and how much water is used to clean the grout. So here we have a very porous tile or natural stone. Maybe it's a very hot day in front of a lot of windows, and your absorption rate is going to be much quicker. So you're going to have a darker shade of grout. This type of grout may be also a little bit weaker because it's not hydrating as much as a fully hydrated grout that has a slower hydration rate. So on a non-vitreous or porcelain tile, slower hydration rate, a little bit lighter color, and definitely harder, denser installation. Harder, denser, less staining going on. But generally, if you're using a single component, we're taking that water of convenience that the contractors are adding out of the equation, and the same thing with the epoxy grout itself. So how are we maintaining these floors? Are they using dirty water? A lot of times we have these multitask dispensers in the bathrooms. The cleaners aren't really degreasing or cleaning, they're disinfecting the tile. And so a lot of times we see floors like this. I generally try to do residential, retail applications that the single component grouts really hold their color and excellent to use. As we get into the healthcare facilities, back of house, schools, then I'm recommending epoxy grouts, and makes it very easy to clean these floors. So here we have the grout on the floor is much darker than the grout on the wall, but it's exactly the same grout, just not being maintained properly. And this is where if you want to save a little bit money, you can use your epoxy grouts or your single component grout on the floor and then go to a cement-based grout on the wall. Save your clients a little bit of money on those installations. So we have to remember that as we get into these 12 by 24s, 48 by 24 by 48s, that when they manufacture these, generally it has a slight bow in them. And so the middle part of that tile will be a little bit higher than the ends. And if you try to do a 50% offset, you're putting the lowest part of the tile next to the highest part of the tile, causing lippage. Generally, the 50% is prohibited unless you get a mock-up approved by the owner and the architect on these installations. Generally, we're looking at a third offset on these patterns. And so there's a lot of different patterns. You can check with your local tile distributor to make sure what types of patterns you can run and create. There are a lot of lippage control systems now that are out there that will tighten those down. You may be able to use that 50%, but again, you want to make sure and get that mock-up and that you, the client, and the installer are all on the same page about the proper lippage on those tile or stones. Now, what we see in the industry, probably the biggest failures in the industry is lack of movement joints. Movement joints are put into the structure to allow that structure to properly move, and we cannot tile over them. In the back of the TCNA handbook, there are EJ 171, different types of construction joints that we can use, expansion joints, isolation joints, but they have to be brought up through the tile assembly themselves to allow that movement. Now, I know you guys create some beautiful patterns, designs, some beautiful structures. I'm always amazed to go and see all the different types of ways that we can do a structure these days and the different finishes. But if you don't put those movement joints into the tile assembly, the building will. Nordstrom's upstairs, again, straight across, tells me there's a control joint there. This is a movement joint, isolation joint on the wall assembly. The engineer know how much this building is going to move, and the tile contractor is making it smaller. You need to use the exact same size as what's on that building itself, because that's the allowable movement on that structure itself. Even diagonal, but it's still going straight across those diagonals. Tells me there's some type of movement joint underneath that tile. Now, of course, if your client has enough money and room and thinks of these floors as disposable, they can come back in and fill this back. This is a casino out in Vegas. Out in their parking lot or maintenance facilities, they have an extra pallet of both colors of these stones, and they actually replace these pretty quickly. Engineering firm, they put their soft joint in, but they really wanted to keep that design pattern without that soft joint going through the middle of that diamond pattern there. But of course, the structure still decided to place that movement joint in. A lot of times you not only get the cracking, sometimes you'll get what we call tile tenting, where it's actually lifting off the floor. Here we get blamed for single-sided thinset or single-sided mortar, where the mortar only adheres to the substrate but not the tile itself. What we see here is the tile with so much pressure that it's actually shearing away from the floor assembly. Also on that little diagonal piece on the right corner there, you can see that it's not covered very well. They're not using any flat troweling, back buttering on this installation. Maybe the mortar was a very weak mortar. They didn't get a good bond to it either. So there's a lot of things going on here, but one of the most important is lack of those movement joints. Interior, we should be looking at 20 to 25 feet in each direction. Exterior, every 8 to 12 feet. And if your interior has a lot of windows, a lot of direct sunlight, a lot of temperature exchange, then you want to treat it like an exterior and put more movement joints in that tile assembly. Now, again, millions of square feet, not every job this is going to happen to, but we do see this quite often, is just lack of movement joints. In the TCNA handbook, it says that the architect, structural engineer must tell the tile contractor where to place these movement joints and how big they should be, because they don't know the movement of these buildings, but the structural engineer and architect should. So again, millions of square feet installed properly, but when it's done bad, this is not an earthquake. This is expansion of the tile itself. So just in case I put you to sleep, I'm sure that woke you up. So again, make sure we put those movement joints in. Another thing to be concerned about, I know it's very easy to place the drain in the center of the room. We can put our dashed lines in the drawing. It looks very neat and clean. They don't get hidden. But if we're doing those large format tiles, sometimes it's difficult to slope the tile down to that drain. So it's something that we need to start thinking about as we're detailing these out before we're under construction. Because if you don't decide how you're going to slope that to the drain, the tile contractor will. A lot of times we exchange these photos across the industry and we get some very unique installations the contractor's trying to get these tiles to slope to a drain. So imagine this is a beautiful hotel lobby going down the middle, beautiful installation. You go down the hallway. It's just a beautiful large format, looking expansive. And as you open the bathroom door, in the center of the bathroom is this mess. So there are a lot of different types of drains. Do we really need to slope this to a drain? Can we just call this an emergency drain and we can squeegee to it, drop a threshold in or something like that to contain the water there? But again, maybe place the drain to one wall or another. But again, it's easier to pre-plan these than it is to actually fix it on the backside. Lighting also plays a huge effect. Wall washer lighting can cause a very good installation to look bad. We also should require that the proper lighting be there when they're installing tiles. I can't tell you how many jobs I've walked where you walk into the bathroom and they've got one little spotlight lighting up that wall for working on that whole bathroom. The wall washer lighting can actually cause a lot of ripple effects. Now this looks like a very poor installation, but the ANSI actually has very tight lippage guidelines. Lippage is the difference between tile to tile and how much is allowed. Generally for most grout joints, you're probably looking at about a 32nd of an inch on the lippage. So that's very tight tolerance. When they put their level on here and their feeler gauges, they actually fell within that 16th of an inch. It was a perfectly fine installation. You hit this with a light from behind and it flattens that wall out. So something to think about. If you're trying to achieve this, great. If you want a very flat looking wall, then this wall washer lighting is not for you. So imagine you're a building code inspector and they tile your building, or the masonry guys come in. They've used a natural stone on the exterior of that installation, and they used a waterproofing membrane, and then they come back and have stone falling off. Now, a lot of times they'll try to tell us that the natural stone is too heavy. There's actually weight requirements that we have, building code requirements. But here we see the masonry guys use a waterproofing membrane on the exterior of this, but they use their dot mounted lick and stick method. They throw some cement and sand on the site, they mix it together, and they make their cement, drop it on the back of the stone and press it into the walls. So here we're showing the proper installation. So he's actually, so here he's using the flat side of the trowel, pushing it into the substrate. This mechanically locks it in, the flat troweling, back buttering. He's coming back with the notched trowel. This gives it a consistent thickness. All cements, even thin set mortars, have some small shrinkage, so we're trying to get consistent shrinkage out of that, consistent thickness of this. Generally, I would recommend going across. What we're trying to do is let that air escape behind here. He's trying to show how non-slip this mortar is, so he's going to comb it in the other direction. And let me go ahead and get this going a little bit farther. So here he's flat troweling, back buttering the stone. Again, pressing it into there, mechanically locking it in, flattening that out. He'll then put another comb, thin set on there. making sure the corners and edges filled. Sorry. So he marries them together and then moves it back and forth to collapse the ridges and fill the valleys. And that's kind of tile 101 for you. So I appreciate your time today. Hope you guys learned a few things. I survived. I hope you guys did too.
Dale, great presentation, and I appreciate it. Excuse me a minute here. I got a call coming in. Sorry about that. Lots of great information there, some of it basic, some of it more detailed, and I think it's great. I do have a few questions here, and I want to run through this with you. So our first question, Dale, is if you run the backer board over the tub flange, you will have lippage issues with the final install, tile install. Is it acceptable to set it on the flange and use a waterproof membrane over the gap?
So best installation practice is to put the backer board over the flange. You will need to fur the wall out or shim the wall out to make sure that you reduce that lippage to get those flat. Drywallers do this all the time. They put the shims behind their board, get it very flat. They can do the same thing in the shower and get it over that lip. If it's properly specified, detailed in the beginning, as you see when they've already started to fur that out, it makes it much tougher when they don't have the shower pan properly installed.
All right. Next question or concern is the Miami sandwich is a standard for floor installations in this person's market. What simple modifications can be made to it to bring installers closer to an approved method? Are you familiar with Miami sandwich?
Sorry, no, I'm trying to think.
David, can you send me an email? I'm going to send you my email address and I'll get you an answer for that for sure. So
yeah, we can definitely help you with that. Yeah, just I haven't heard of the Miami sandwich before. I'm sure once he tells me what it is, it's like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Just different terminology.
Right. All right. When talking about grout, can you cover the type of grout to use with natural stone and glass? Also, what can happen to the tile if the incorrect grout is used?
Sure. And I struggle with this a little bit. Generally, we're going to be looking for natural stone and glass and unsanded grout. Sometimes on very fragile glass, natural stone, sanded grout can scratch it. A lot of times I see grout being blamed for scratching stone and glass tiles. And I was an installer, I've done this. I mean, our knee pads get full of thin sets, they get very sharp. We drag them across the floors, we drag our buckets across the floors. I actually had black marble that had some type of beeswax put on it to make it really shine up. And as I dragged my plastic bucket across, it actually scratched it. And a lot of times those issues will get blamed. Well, it's the grout, and it can scratch it. So again, mock up, test is best. If you're really concerned, and always go with the manufacturer's recommendations. If the manufacturer of that glass tile, natural stone says use unsanded, then that's what you should be using on that, and or do that mock up.
So someone is just asking, what is an AIA CEU? And I think you can answer that pretty easy.
Sure. AIA CEU is 45 minutes. This is an AIA. We can't talk about product. It's supposed to be very generic. just giving you installation credit. It's for the architects continuing education. A lot of different associations, nurses have to do this too. So.
Great. All right. Would you recommend type S mortar or thin set for natural stone or stone veneer insulation for exterior vertical applications?
So as long as we're meeting code for the size requirements, if you're getting a very large, heavy stone, then you'll have to mechanically anchor that natural stone. Generally, I recommend the thin set adhesives, at least an ANSI 118-15 for those exterior installations, because they have a very high shear bond strength. Sand and cement mixed on the job site, kind of lower shear bond strengths. They're just not getting that adhesive that we can get using our polymers, the cements, and all the other products that are manufactured in these thin set mortars. And we actually test these all the time, so we get much higher shear bonds. So I would call an exterior veneer applications a heavy duty use and go with that 118-15, and even use one of the higher end 118-15s, because an exterior veneer, if it's falling off the wall, becomes a life safety issue. You don't want to be saving 20 cents, 30 cents a square foot because you used a very cheap mortar or sand and cement.
All right. How are specific installation methods specified? For example, there are multiple installation methods for a shower installation.
Correct. So you're going to pick out what substrate you're using. So the shower installations are all divided up, whether you're using a cement backer board, a mortar bed installation, or other types of backer boards. And you'll look, and they're all very similar, but it may just come down to which substrate you're using. For example, B419 is a coated glass mat, water resistant gypsum backer board. And basically that's an ASTM C1178 backer board. So everything on that detail is very similar to the cement backer board detail, just a different substrate. So generally when you're looking at the TCNA, you're going to look at the recommended uses, the environmental classifications, and the limitations to see if that's going to fall within what your structure, your project will work with.
So this next one, I think you answered this, but maybe you can run through it again. For movement joints on exterior wall applications with natural stone, what is the maximum width?
So we always fall back to EJ 171. So you're looking for width is determined. Let me, very specific answer. I want to make sure I properly quote TCNA handbook here. So exterior width shall be a minimum 3/8 inch for joints 8 inches on center, and a minimum 1/2 inch for joints 12 inches on center. Minimum widths must be increased 1/16 of an inch for each 15 degrees Fahrenheit tile surface temperature change greater than 100 degrees Fahrenheit between summer high and winter low. So hopefully that took care of that. It's very specific, probably a little more than you wanted.
Dale, would you recommend that if you're in that situation, you talk to, talk to your grout manufacturer and see what their recommendation is?
Oh, of course.
Right. Always go to the manufacturer.
Yep.
Manufacturer's recommendations supersede all TCNA handbook methods. And go ahead.
Yeah, TCNA handbooks are recommendations. Until they're put into the specifications, then they become the law guideline type of deal that the installer has to follow. But the manufacturer of the tile or stone knows specifically how much that's going to expand and contract, and will have their own recommendations. If they don't, that's when we fall back on the TCNA EJ 171.
Excellent, good answer. All right, one more here. With heated floors, do you have to increase the size of the expansion joint?
I live in California. I love heated floors, but I haven't run across this very much. You're probably going to, again, check with the heating element manufacturer and your manufacturer of that tile or stone and check with them. I think these guidelines probably would be fine with those. And generally, my recommendation would be to slowly heat those floors up. You don't want to be shutting it off and having a very cold floor and then boom, quickly heat it up again. You want a gradual temperature change in that installation.
How important are TCNA guidelines to residential projects?
Oh, very important. I mean, I dwell in the commercial world, but they apply to residential also. And of course, you can get away with a little more in the residential because the traffic is not as much as commercial installations. But the temperature change, the movement joints, we've seen these fail in residentials where they're installed in the summer and then as you come into fall, they start kicking their heaters on and drying the tile or stone out, and you have that expansion and the tile tenting failure. So TCNA, very important in the residential also.
Dale, I want to thank you. You did a great job, great presentation, and thank you. I want to thank everyone for attending today. Please look for our invite to our next webinar, which will be August 15th. And appreciate everyone. Have a great weekend. Dale, thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, everyone.